Today, we're going to configure a router and firewall with ports and port forwarding to allow us to serve a website from our home IP address. We will be using Linux Ubuntu and the Apache 2 web server in this example. However, you can configure the exact same settings if you're using Windows 7 or 2008 and Internet Information Services as your web server. You should be familiar with the following concepts. A DMZ, or demilitarized zone. In this case, it means an IP address through which your firewall is wide open and no port filtering is enabled. 2. Some commonly used web and FTP ports. 80 for standard web pages, 443 for secure sockets layer or HTTPS, in other words, secure encrypted HTML traffic such as through a shopping cart, and ports 20 and 21 for the file transfer protocol or an FTP server. 3. Routing. IP addressing and the flow of traffic between different networks and subnets. And finally, fourth, port forwarding, which is the redirection of web traffic towards certain IP addresses according to the ports and protocols being used by that traffic.
Okay, another common, daemon or service to run on a Unix box or a Windows box is that of a web server. And of course, the one in Linux and the open source world is Apache. Very wonderful, powerful, feature-rich web server. So we're going to do sudo apt get install, and we're going to do Apache 2 this time. And just need to grab 10.1 megabytes. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that and install that via apt-get. And it's downloading. And it looks like everything went okay. And where that puts things by default, although normally things go in the SRV folder, like that's where our anonymous FTP was. Let me go to root, and actually those files are placed inside the var folder instead. And if I do a listing here, and then see the var folder, and there's a subdirectory called www, and that's where, how every website has sort of a default index HTML or HTML page or default HTML or HTML. Let me go into var, and I'll list the contents of var, and then there's www, and that's actually when we installed the server. It added just sort of a dummy or a sample index file there. So if I go to www, and then there we are. So there's there's sort of our web page, and if I were to cat it, all right, so this is the default web page for this server. Yada yada yada. I'm just going to modify it real quick to match. Our host name is Galactica here, so I'm going to do gk sudo, and I'm going to do gedit, of course, again, and I'm going to do this time var, and I'm going to do www and index HTML. Just kind of quickly modify the page. Need the root password there. This way, it won't be read-only. This way I can actually save changes. And by default, Apache would say it works. Welcome to the Galactica, I'll say. And let me go over here and I'll just add some header tags in real quick. And let me add a title. Galactica. And I'm just going to center this. Welcome to the Galactica. And let's add a line, and I'm gonna close my center tag, and we'll just put a little message here. No silence allowed. No silence allowed. And just put a little message on the Guardian. That doesn't really matter. I mean, obviously you would make a fancier web page or a fancier website, but that'll just give us something to display. Now the way to test it, I'm going to go ahead and exit, and to make sure that my server is running, and this is one of the few exceptions to the rule, I don't really have to restart here, because it's just serving out web pages anyway. But a great way to test your web server, make sure that it's working, open up Firefox or whatever web browser you might be using, type in http:// and you can use localhost or your host name or your IP address. So now it says, welcome to Galactica, no silence allowed, guardian of the fleet. So now I'm serving out that web page. Same thing, if I type Galactica, that's my host name. Welcome to Galactica, no silence allowed, guardian of the fleet, yada yada yada. And also, if I didn't have DNS or host name set up, or if I didn't know the host name, I could use an IP address as well, 109.207.13. I think I'm 15. Yeah, there you go. Then I'd have to use ifconfig. Alright. And now the only other thing is, if you're going to set this up as a web server, to access through a firewall or through a router, let me go log into my router real quick. HTTP. I know that my IP is 15 right now, 109.207.13.15. So I'm going to go HTTP:/, and my router address is my wireless router 109.207.13.1, and let me log in here. And this is sort of my Netgear router page, but you would also need to set some configuration settings up here. And the reason is because this is my local IP on the the local area network, or LAN. If I do ifconfig, and let me pull up the wireless interface here. Nope. Let me actually spell it right. Ifconfig. So notice this is my actual IP on. That's the local network inside or behind the firewall and behind the router. It's class C, 109.207.13.15. However, if I were to go out onto the internet, I would have a different address, and that's what I would need to access. So, first off, I would need to look at whatever I might have, assigned to me. So I'm getting my IP address dynamically from the internet service provider, and right now my IP is 184.88.123.77. So if I were going to access my website, I would have to access that on the outside port of my router. But then the other thing I have to do is set up port forwarding, or either a DMZ, a demilitarized zone. Port forwarding is a bit safer than setting up a demilitarized zone, but the ports that web traffic uses are 80, and if it's SSL, 443. For secure sockets. And here I have it mapped to 177, which that was a static IP, and I would either want to configure a reservation or make this a static IP. But for now, if I were going to do that, I would say add. Let me go ahead and add here port forwarding for FTP. Go here and edit this. So if I were going to make this reachable from outside, from the internet, I'm going to have to give it the IP of my new Linux box. So 109.207.13, and now 15 is the new address where it would go to. So it's mapped to 15. And again, notice over here that that's my IP address, 15. So I'm logged into my router, it's 15. So I'm mapping it to that. That's a safer way to do it. Now, when you're a lot of times the easiest thing to do is to turn off all security and then add security back, and then start filtering ports until you get it as tight as you can get it, but you still have the available services. So if that's the case, there's usually a DMZ option on most routers. So like here's my default DMZ server 13. If I wanted to make this Linux box wide open, I would say 109.207.13.15 and click apply. And that would mean that would pull off all of the port filtering. That would pull off, it would just pretty much make my box wide open to the internet. So it would make my website accessible, but that might not be a secure thing to do. I might want to lock it down a little bit more. And so for that, port forwarding is better rather than making it a DMZ. But those are just several options. And if you did that, once you've done that, and set it to forward those port 80 and port 443, requests for web pages to the local IP address on your local network, then when somebody outside on the internet accesses your public IP, in this case, this is the public IP that I've leased from Bright House, from my internet service provider, then your router will route that traffic directly to your web server, in this case my Linux box, and it'll serve out the web page.